You ever had one of those days? Every day. Well, I'll shut up now. So today, while we're sitting there, Jim is presiding at the Lord's Supper table. Don't ask me how, because I really don't know how. I kind of do, but I don't really. But anyway, while Jim was leading the prayer for the fruit of the vine, I stuck my finger in mine and it went everywhere. So luckily, I had on a plaid tie and it kind of disguised the spot that got on my shirt. And my pants dried and they look good. And I'm going to clean up the pew tomorrow. So then I go out to eat. Yeah, go up to Blue Coast Burrito. We have some chips. I have some other stuff, but I'm eating my chips and dip and deposited some of my dip on my lap and on my shirt. So Suzanne said, as we were leaving, will you go up to the drink machine and get me some more drink to take home? Sure. So I go up there and I get me some, fill my cup up. It looks fine. And I turn around and I glanced off, and all of a sudden it just all over my hand, my wrist, and I don't think it got on my clothes. And the guy that was manager, he walked past me about that time. He just looked at me. Well, I'm thinking, luckily it's on this rug and this carpet. Bye. So I went home and took a shower. No, I didn't, but I changed shirts and all. It's just, I told Suzanne, I said, I don't know if I want to go to NHC or not. It's just one of those days. And so luckily it's calmed down since then. So if you noticed that my wardrobe this morning was out of kilter, it's just because I was clumsy today. That's the way it goes, isn't it? We have days like that. Did you hear about the man that went into office? Couldn't find a good office picture, but he went into the office one day and he wasn't the most pleasant of people. He was grumpy and just griping all the time. And so finally, in a meeting late in that afternoon, an individual looked at him and he was talking and he finally got finished. He says, anybody got any questions? Somebody said, yes, sir, I do. And they said, well, what's that? He said, did you wake up grumpy this morning? He said, no, I let her sleep. Sometimes we just don't see ourselves as we are. And yet that's sad, but it's a reality. Sometimes we transfer our emotions from to us from other people, and we think, okay, this is how we are, when this is not how we are. But the reality of it is we need a good attitude. There are some folks that are grumpy, some folks that are just irritable. There are some folks, excuse me, that are irritating. There are some folks that are always sad. There are some folks that are always glad. There's some folks that just, it just depends, and you just kind of have to talk to them for a minute to figure out what kind of mood they're in today to know if you can talk with them or not. Well, we have that scale that runs the gambit, and you might say, well, that's fine, and it is, but it isn't. I had an elder once that somebody said, well, it takes all kinds, and this elder said, no, it doesn't. We just have to learn to live with them. Well, there's a certain amount of truth to that. So what do we do, though, really to have a good attitude? Now, understand, and I'm going to use the word attitude tonight from the standpoint of a psychologist. A psychologist basically defines attitude as a state of mind or disposition towards someone or something. In other words, how you feel about something. What is your attitude? What is the disposition that you have? How do you feel about someone? How do you feel about things? But then how do you present yourself? Do you have a good attitude? Do you have a positive attitude? Do you have a negative attitude? Do you have a rotten attitude? Do you have a really good attitude? And I think no matter where we fall on that scale, no matter where we fall, we are all different on that scale. No matter where we fall, we can always work on it to be better and do better. So what do we do? How do we go about it? Well, let's just give you five things tonight to at least ponder as you have this week to think about it. First of all, look on the good side of things. It's easy to look on the bad side, and really we tend to be more pessimistic than optimistic. In other words, we tend to look on the bad side instead of the good side. We've used the illustration before, but when you look at your gas gauge and you look at it and somebody says, well, how much gas do you have? Do you say, well, I have a third of the tank? Or do you say, well, I was able to use 3/4 of it or two-thirds of it? I'll get my math right in a minute. Sorry. I used 2/3 of it. I went to see my granddaughter, used 2/3 of it. Or you say, well, no, I have a third. We look at that, and it's all how we look at it. When you look at the story of the 12 spies that went into the land of Canaan in the book of Numbers 13 and 14, and you see two dispositions, really, don't you? You see 10 spies that come back and say, we can't do it. There's no way that we can defeat these giants. There's no way that we can overcome them. This is a land that is huge. This is a land that's plentiful. This is a land that is just tremendous. And we are but grasshoppers in the land of giants. There are two, Joshua and Caleb, that come back and say, man, with God's help, we can do this. And the answer is found in the book of Numbers, 14th chapter. You say, well, how in the world did Joshua and Caleb, how did they have such a different disposition? And it says of Caleb, it says that he had a different or another spirit about him. In other words, his attitude was different. He felt different about things. It's sort of like David and Goliath. When you think about David going out, the shepherd boy going out and facing this 9.5 foot tall giant, you ask yourself, how in the world could he do it? His brothers wouldn't go out there. Men of war wouldn't go out there, even though Goliath had called them out day by day. Why wouldn't they go out there and fight? Well, they looked at it, Goliath as being too big to fight. David, however, looked at him as too big to miss. And so therefore he went out, understanding, of course, the hand of God. A difference in attitude. The Bible tells us to rejoice. In a few weeks, Lord willing, or sometime later on, probably this year, I want to ask the question, why did Paul say rejoice in the Lord always? Again, I say rejoice. I do that, but not only why, but how do we accomplish that? How do we go about rejoicing in the Lord? Because there are times in our life, let's look at it and let's just face it, there are times in our lives it's hard to rejoice. Loss of a job, loss of a loved one, loss of health, things don't go the way we want it to go. There are a multitude of reasons why things do not work out the way we want them to, and when they don't work out, we realize that we have difficulties, and we grumble and we complain. Not everything comes up roses. Yes, the Lord may say that he knows us and that he has plans for us, plans of hope and peace, according to Jeremiah 29, verse 11. But at the same time, too, there are times in our lives, according to Psalm 42 and verse 10, in which our soul is disquieted in us. We are upset. We don't have that peace. And we want it, but there are things that are going on that create a problem for us. And so it is very difficult for us to look on the good side of things. Let us understand that God is in control. The earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. That's what the psalmist reminds us in Psalm 24 and verse 1. God's still in charge. Doesn't matter what's going on in our life, God is still in control. He's still in charge. It doesn't matter whether it's good or even whether things that are happening to us are bad. God is in charge. Man hasn't taken over. Man hasn't displaced God, nor has God given up and said, I quit. That's just not happened. God is still in control. God is God. God being in control, then he's sure to bless us. He is sure to give us what we need. God will supply all of our needs according to Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. Now, I think the key to that is several things. I think the key is, first of all, if you go back earlier in Philippians chapter 4, Paul said that he had learned in whatsoever state he was therewith to be content. And content is the idea of I'm learning to be satisfied. And notice that he said he had to learn this, and he didn't. It's not the idea that he learned it completely. He's still learning it. I think that's important when you figure out that he wrote that while he was in prison. about 62 AD. Well, you keep reading, and then Paul says, God can do everything, verse 13. And everything includes that he shall supply our needs. The word needs is key there. It's not wants. It's not extras, extravagance. It's what we need. God will supply. So God's in control. God blesses, and then God promises. But God's promise is not just promise of blessing, but it's the promise of eternity with him. Why can't I look on the good side of things? Why can't I be optimistic? Why can't I look at things from a positive standpoint? If I understand God's in control, God is taking care of everything, but God is going to give me a home in heaven with him. Things of this life are important to us while we're here, but ultimate importance is not the here and now, but is the beyond. Which would we rather have? Big house on the hill, a lot of money in the bank account, clothes that we want, friends here up on earth, or would we rather have heaven? What do we want? What's important to us? That's the question we need to ask. Paul says, though, in all of that, look on the good side. Look on the good side of life. No, remember, we don't have a continuing city, but we seek one to come. Hebrews 13, verse 14. And so knowing that, we then learn to look on the good side. Preacher, one time, always was optimistic, always looked on the good side of things. And the congregation was just beside themselves. How could he do that? Because somebody, you got to have a grumpy day every once in a while. Got to have a day where things don't go right. One day, one Sunday, everybody came to church, and it had been raining cats and dogs for 3 days. I mean, everything was wet. Water was running everywhere. Everything was overflowing. Banks of all the rivers and streams were overflowing. Ditches were completely full. Yards were full. It was so wet, the worms were coming up out of the ground coughing. Now, that's how wet it was. It's bad. Y'all can laugh at things. Thank you. It was that bad. And so everybody thought Sunday, well, when that preacher prays, he can't pray a positive prayer this morning. We just don't see it. So he got up this morning and said, Lord, we thank you that it's not always this wet. He looked on the good side. Find the good. Look for the good. You have to look for it. You have to search for it, but find the good. Why? Because God's in control. God's blessing us, and God will give us eternity with him. And that's all that really matters. Then second of all, get past it. Winter's coming on, whether you like it or not. I mean, Lord willing, and we all get to see it. Winter's coming on. My wife makes some of the best chili and best soup around. I'm sorry. I know y'all think y'all's is good, and that's fine. You commend your wife for it because you'll tend to get more if you do. But my wife's is the best. But I know when she makes that soup, and she's trying to teach me how to cook, and that's why, things are such as they are. And she's trying to teach me to cook, and I know when she makes that soup, we open those cans, and she starts pouring all this in and adding this and adding that and adding this over here and adding that over there. And then here's the secret. After she's added all this, that, and the other, let it sit. Let it kind of simmer for a while. Don't just eat it right then. It's not as good. Soup's better the third time it's warmed up, right? We do that in life. We simmer. We stew over things. We can't get past it. We can't let it go. And yet that's what the Bible says. We hold on to past failures, past injuries, past insults. We hold on to whatever is in the past that we didn't agree with or like. And even the things that we did agree with and we did like, we hold on to those things, and they become albatrosses around our neck. Why? Because nobody wants around us, because we keep repeating the same thing over and over. We need to learn to get past the past. In order to get past the past, the one thing we have to understand is God is a forgiving God. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 12. Your sins and iniquities I remember no more. God says, I forgive. God is a forgiving God. And he tells us that we are to be forgiven, that we're to love our enemies, that we're not to despise our enemies, but we're, according to Luke chapter 6, verse 36, to love our enemies. Paul said in Romans 12 that we're, as much as possible, to live at peace with all people. Boy, and sometimes that's a challenge, isn't it? And while it's a challenge, Paul says, you let God handle it. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. He says, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him water to drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire upon his head. He says, you let God handle it. You let God take care of it. You love your enemy. You learn to get along with them, and you learn to forgive them for whatever they said or whatever they did to you. Because in the scheme of things, from a perspective standpoint, does it really matter? Does it really matter? Not only do you forgive your enemies, but you also need to forgive yourself. I'm thankful for the example of Paul. In the pages of the New Testament, if we're reading it, say, from Matthew through Revelation, reading it that way, we get to the book of Acts and we find this man by the name of Saul. We find him persecuting Christians. We find him beating them, stoning them, putting them in prison. And yet there is found then in the book of Acts, as we're reading from Matthew to Revelation, there is that story, matter of fact, some 3 times in the book of Acts, of his conversion. It's told through different perspectives or through different individuals, different ways. But it's his conversion to Christianity. We find then, as we progress through the books that he has written, we get to the book of Philippians, and he talks about what he's given up. He talks about being a Jew of Jew, being a Pharisee, circumcised the 8th day of the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Jew. I was a Jew. If anybody was a better Jew, I didn't know him. Paul talked about in Philippians 3, while he was a Jew of Jews, he says, this is what I gave up. And he talks about what he gave up. Gave up his family, gave up his religion, gave up really everything he believed, and changed. Keep reading. We're headed now to Revelation. And we find out in 1 Timothy chapter 1 that Paul talks about how that he was an insolent man, that he was a blasphemer, a persecutor, an injurious or insolent man. How did you do that, Paul? How did you become from that type of man to the type of man that ultimately could say that I have finished my race? I've kept the faith. And henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness. What changed? Well, now we have to go back. We go back to the book of 1 Corinthians. And we go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And Paul talks about in verse 9 and 10. He talks about that he is the least of all the apostles, that he's the least of the least. But in talking about being the least of the least, he says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. How did he get then from being so terrible to being so good? He said, it's the grace of God. I understood the unmerited favor of God. I understood the love of God. And ultimately then he was able to forgive himself to the point where when he talked to people about Christianity, even though you go back to the book of Acts, one of the things that is noteworthy is that no one wanted to have anything to do with him because they were afraid of him. They were afraid he'd persecute them as Christians. Being unsure of Paul's conversion and of really his conviction, his faith, they wanted to stay away from him. Well, how is it that Paul didn't beat himself up the whole time? How is it that we look at Paul and we look at what he gave up? We can look at then what he went through, 2 Corinthians 12, the 11th chapter and 12th chapter, and we can find out that what he gave up, what he went through, was all for the cause of Christ. And he says, while he was the least of all the apostles, he says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. Because I believe he was able to forgive himself. He was able to let it go. He was able to say, okay, what I did was wrong, but it's in the past. And people went from being scared of him to wanting to listen to him and follow him. And he converted, no telling how many people, because of Christ. Because he got past his past. David would be another one. David struggled with his past. David, of course, the most noted thing that we remember is his sin with Bathsheba, his killing of Uriah. There were other things that David did, numbering people and various other sins. But nevertheless, we ask, David, how did you get past it? David struggled with it. Read Psalm 32, read Psalm 51, and you'll see David struggling. But David ultimately was able to forgive himself. You read Psalm 32 and 51, you see his struggle, but you see him getting past what was going on in his life. He developed a good attitude because he understood that he had to get past the past, that he had to move on. And so whatever it is in our life, whether it's the victories and the wonderful accomplishments that we made, or whether it's the sad defeats and the problems with people and life and the world itself, we need to learn to get past it. Forgive others, forgive ourselves, let God forgive us, and move on. Thirdly, we need to learn to laugh. Laughter is great, great medicine. Merry heart does good like medicine, but broken spirit dries the bones. Proverbs 15. Solomon said that. We get that. We get that laughter is good. We get that the psalmist said in Psalm 126 and verse 2, he said, in their hearts is laughter, and in their lips is a song, because God has done marvelous things. Wow. How do you get to that point? Well, you understand, as the psalmist would tell us there, you would understand once again who's in control, and you would understand what's going on. You see a matter of hope. You see a reason of looking forward and looking ahead. You see a matter of learning who to have faith in and trust. But learning to laugh is difficult for some people. I've shared with you the story of a man that I was talking to one day. He was a member of the congregation where I was preaching at the time, not here, but he was a member of the congregation. Matter of fact, he has since passed away. And as we were talking, of course, I was, my usual dumb self, and laughed, and he said, I envy you. Now, this was a man that had done fairly well for himself through life. He was older at the time. He had done fairly well for himself. Bible school teacher, well thought of, had been at one time an elder in church. And I said, you really do? And he said, yeah. He said, you do something I can't do. Okay, what's that? You laugh. I can't laugh. And we got to talking about it. And I don't really know, never really, because he never would allow me the opportunity to delve into it further. But there was something there in the past that held up his ability to laugh. And yet doctors tell us that laughter is good for us. Doctors tell us that it's a stress reducer. Doctors tell us that it will lower our blood pressure. Doctors tell us also that it will boost your immune system. That a good laugh a day is really good medicine. Now, a laugh a day won't keep you away from the doctor, but a laugh a day will really help your life, really change your mood, and change even the way you think. You learn to laugh. Now, some of you might say, "Well, I'll go home and I'll try it. I'll just sit there and I'll just laugh." No, you gotta learn to develop a sense of humor, and that gets you really back to the first point of looking on the good side, looking at things through a different perspective, through a different lens, if you will, to see not the mean, terrible things, but to see the funny thing, and then to be able to laugh at it, to be able to laugh at yourself. You know, it's not nice, it's not pleasant, it's not what we should do with regards to laughing at others. Now, we can laugh at a comedian because a comedian basically is giving us permission to laugh at his stories that may be about him or his family or hers. There are female comedians as well. But other than that, unless a story is told and the individual is telling you and they're laughing and they're telling you in order for you to laugh, it's not something we do. We don't sit there and laugh at people. Somebody walks out this door and they trip. And let's say they almost fall. Let's not put them to the point of falling, but they almost fall. And you might say, "That was funny," and begin to laugh. Well, not really, unless they're laughing. Now, if they're laughing and they think it's funny, then okay, we laugh with them, but not at them. But laughter is a blessing from God. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to cry. You want a good attitude? Develop the attitude of, God made me where I can laugh. And I'm going to laugh. I'm going to get through life with a laughter. Next, count your blessings. Wow. God does supply all of our needs, doesn't he? Philippians 4, verse 19. God does give us everything. He's blessed us with all spiritual blessings, according to Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3. That's God. God is rich towards us. That's what Paul, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 13. We all are blessed. And the truth be known, it doesn't really matter whether we have a lot or a little. Even a person with a little can learn to count the blessings, and oftentimes does so much more than those of us that have a lot. But if we learn to count our blessings, learn to count what God has given to us, that he's given us this day our daily bread, Matthew 6, verse 13, that he has supplied all of our needs. I was going back this week and studying for this and came across something that, we've all studied before. But in Exodus chapter 16, verse 4, God is talking to the children of Israel, in the wilderness, and God says that he's going to rain out bread over the children of Israel. And he did that daily. He gave them what they needed. He supplied their needs. He blessed them. He took care of them in a time in which they did not think necessarily that that would be able to be possible. And yet, the Lord does bless us and keep us. The Lord makes his face to shine upon us and gives us peace. The Lord makes his countenance shine upon us. He blesses us. And he blesses us again and again and again. Deuteronomy 6, beginning about verse 26. We need to count those blessings. Make sure that we understand that we really are blessed. You see, we can look at what we don't have. I'll share with you some family information. I found it interesting, and it's on our kids. Yesterday, as we were visiting, our kids are doing what so many young adults, and not just young adults, but really all ages are doing now, and that is not going to the store. Now, here is my son's thinking, and my wife will probably say, well, that sounds just like you. That's why you like the idea. But this was my son's thinking. My son's thinking is if we order online and get it delivered to the house, that my wife will not go to the store and find something not necessarily that she needs, but something she wants that's going to cost us money out of the budget that we don't have at this point in time, and buy something that she says she wants, but she doesn't need. Because if we order and it's delivered to us, we'll just buy what we need. I found wisdom in that. I didn't say I was going to do it to Suzanne. He said, you're still going to go to the store, aren't you? I said, I love my wife. Yeah. But I found wisdom in that. Because the wisdom to me was, okay, we're going to spend what we've got, but we're going to get the things that we have to have. And then we'll have some left over from time to time for things we want. We're blessed, aren't we? We're blessed to have that abundance. They are too, by the way. They're blessed. They're very blessed. We're all blessed to have an abundance. God blesses us. God makes his face to shine upon us. Lady one time wrote to her mother and said, she said, I'm coming home. She was out in Arizona. Her husband was in the service. She said, I'm coming home. She said, it's hot out here. I don't know anybody. I can't make friends with anybody. I don't like it out here. I'm coming home. Her mother wrote back this little poem. Two men looked through bars. One saw mud and the other saw stars. That's all she wrote. Little girl was anxious to get a letter from her mama, and she cherished that. She opened it up. She read it. She realized what her mama was saying, and so she stayed. It's all in how you look at it. Count your blessings and see what you have. Then next, practice the replacement principle. This is more of a psychological thing than anything. It's the idea of replacing one thing with another. And if we learn to replace one thing with another, we develop a better attitude. We have a happier life. We develop an attitude more that God would have us to have. What do we replace? We're replacing, first of all, anger with love. Well, that makes sense. The Lord says, be angry and sin not. Don't let the sun go down upon your wrath. He didn't say he was wrong to be angry, but he said, you gotta be angry about the right thing. We're often angry with people, and we're often angry with the world. The world is wrong and the world has mistreated us. Yet God's principle was that of love. Love your neighbor, love yourself, love the Lord. Next, replace fear with faith. Sometimes we are fearful. Sometimes we live in fear. And there's a certain amount of fear that we all need, right? I mean, if you're afraid of getting run over by a car, you're going to look both ways before you cross the street. You're going to look both ways before you pull out in front of them. So there's a certain amount of fear that we all need. We're fearful that, our health may deteriorate, so we're going to take good care of our bodies. We're going to take care of our health. On and on and on you go. Mental health, very important. You take care of that because you're afraid of things that happen, maybe things that have been in the past in your family or whatever. There's a certain amount of fear, but ultimately when fear rules our life, we're afraid of everything, and it dictates every move we make. Then it has overcome our life, and it has become the driving force for our life. And the Bible tells us it's our faith. We talked a little bit about that this morning in the sermon. So we need to replace fear with faith. Next, replace complaining with gratitude. Said it wrong, didn't I? Replace complaining with gratitude. It's easy to complain, isn't it? It's easy to complain about people. It's easy to complain about life. It's easy to complain about God. It's easy to complain about the fact that preachers preach too long, you talk too much, you said too much. It's easy to complain. I mean, you can complain about anything and everything, and it just comes naturally to all of us. But we need to replace complaining with gratitude. Be thankful for what we have. Be thankful for what we've been given to be thankful for the opportunities that we have. Be thankful for the people that are in our lives. Be thankful for the things that we're able to go through, because everything in life is not supposed to be roses. There is difficulty in our life, and I want to talk about this in a few weeks as well in a sermon. The fact that we're not there yet, but the things that we're going through are there to make us grow. So what do? We look at it, we thank God for it. We may not really appreciate it, but we replace our complaining about it with gratitude to God. Replace bitterness with forgiveness. We can become bitter in life, can't we? Life's not fair. It's not always fair. It's not going to be fair. For whatever reason, it's just not going to be fair. It's not going to be equal. It never will be. It never has been, never will be. There's some that'll have more, some that'll have less. There's some that will attain greater heights than some others. And we can get bitter about it. We can get bitter about what we don't have. We can get bitter about how people have treated us, and we can get bitter about anything and everything you want to get bitter about. But we need to learn to forgive. Forgive others. Forgive our enemies. Forgive ourselves. Next and last, replace feeling sorry for yourself with the idea of helping someone. That's an easy one. Replace the idea. We can sit down and we can say, oh, poor me. Woe is me. Look what I'm going through. Look what's happening in my life. Look at the things that God has allowed to take place with me. Or we can get up off of our seat and do something for somebody else, and we'll feel better for it. One of the privileges that Ken and I have when we go to NHC every Sunday, and of course Jim leads us, but one of the privileges that Ken and I have, and Jim Orman a lot of times goes with us as well, is after we have our service, we go to some of the rooms. Teresa, by the way, comes, and we go to some of the rooms and see some of the folks that literally can't get out of bed and come to the worship service, and we carry them the Lord's Supper. And Ken said today, said it a couple of times, and I think he's right. He said, you walk through this place and see if you don't get humbled. See folks in bed. See folks that, bless their hearts, they don't even know if they're in the world. You see folks that their folks are there loving on them, and they're not even sure who those people are. Change your attitude real quick. It'll change your thinking real quick. So if you want an attitude adjustment, come with me on Sunday afternoon, and Ken and Jim and Teresa, and Suzanne and Donna and Vicky, and we'll change your attitude real quick. Don't feel sorry for yourself. It's easy to feel sorry for yourself. And yet we can allow us sometimes of feeling sorry for ourselves, but at the same time too, we need to be individuals that replace that feeling of sorry for getting up and helping somebody else. That's what God has called us to. For we are his workmanship, created to God through Christ Jesus, unto good works. Ephesians 2, verse 10. Story is told. This was back in the gold rush days. There were two miners that hit a vein of gold. And they realized what they had hit. But they had run out of supplies. They had run out of food, and they had run out of their pickaxes were broke, and they had run out of things that they needed. So they decided to go into town. And they went into town with the very idea of buying the supplies that they needed and coming out of town back to their mine, but telling no one that they'd hit a vein of gold. They went into town. They went into town separately. They bought their supplies. And both of them, as they made their way back and they tried to kind of go out of the way to get back to where they were, so that if somebody was following them, they wouldn't know where they were and they'd get lost. But both of them brought a crowd of people with them. And so the first fellow looked at the second and said, we agreed not to tell anybody. And the second fellow said, well, I didn't. You must have. And he said, I didn't tell anybody. What was the difference? They got to asking people, how and why did you follow us? And they said, we could tell by the smiles on your faces that you must have hit gold. People watch us, and they can tell the attitude that we have by watching us. I want to have the attitude that God wants me to have so that I can bring others to Jesus Christ. And I believe part of letting my light shine before men is to have a good attitude. So this evening, you look at your life and see where you stand. If you need the Lord's invitation, won't you come? While together we stand and sing.